The rain came down in relentless curtains, turning the dirt streets of Willow Creek into a quagmire that sucked at the boots of anyone foolish enough to be out in it. Jedediah Carson, known to most as Jed, hunched his shoulders against the deluge, the brim of his Stetson sagging under the weight of the water. His horse, a sturdy bay named Rusty, plodded through the mud with a resigned air, as if he too understood the futility of fighting the Wyoming storm. Jed was no stranger to hardship or 20 years of ranching, breaking horses, and wrestling with the unforgiving land had carved lines into his face that made him look older than his 32 years. But tonight, the weight on his chest wasn't just the cold or the wet, it was the loneliness that had settled into his bones like damp rot. His ranch, 10 miles out from town, was a testament to his stubborn Williamite spread of cattle and grassland that turned a profit most years. Yet it lacked the one thing he'd begun to crave, someone to share it with, to fill the silence of the long evenings with more than the crackle of a fire. 3 months ago, half drunk on whiskey and despair, Jed had penned a letter to a matrimonial agency in Chicago. He wasn't much for words, but he'd managed to scrawl out his hopes: a wife, kind and hardworking, to build a life with. The agency had responded properly, promising a woman named Clara Mayhew, 24, from Boston, who sought a fresh start out west. They described her as plain but sturdy, with a good heart and a willingness to endure the hardships of frontier life. Jed had clung to that letter like a lifeline, imagining a woman who might not mind his rough hands or the quiet that clung to him like dust. But the stagecoach she was meant to arrive on had come and gone 2 days ago, empty of any bride. The driver had shrugged, muttering something about mix-ups in Cheyenne, and Jed had ridden home with a familiar ache in his gut. Another promise broken, another dream drowned in the mud of reality. Now, as he guided Rusty toward the saloon for a drink to dull the sting, Jed's eyes caught on something out of place. Beneath the sagging awning of the general store, a figure huddled against the wall, half hidden by the shadows and the rain. It was a woman, her form small and shivering, her bonnet drooping like a wilted flower. A battered valise sat beside her, its leather cracked and soaked, as if it had been tossed out into the storm along with her. Her shoulders shook, and not just from the cold, Jed realized, but from sobs that carried over the hiss of the rain. Something twisted in his chest, a pang he couldn't name. He wasn't the sort to meddle in others' troubles. Life had taught him to keep his head down and his hands busy. But a woman crying alone in a storm wasn't something he could ride past, not when the night already felt heavy with ghosts. He reined in Rusty and dismounted, his boots sinking into the mud with a wet squelch. The wind tugged at his coat as he approached, keeping his steps slow so as not to startle her. "Ma'am," he called, his voice rough but gentle, barely audible over the rain. "You all right out here?" The woman flinched, her head jerking up. Her face was half obscured by the sodden bonnet, but Jed caught the glint of red-rimmed eyes and cheeks streaked with tears and mud. "Go away," she said, her voice sharp despite its tremble. "Ain't nothin' here for you to gawk at." Jed raised his hands, palms out, like he was calming a spooked horse. "Ain't gawkin'. Just don't seem right, leaving a lady out in this mess. You got somewhere to go? Someone waiting for you?" She let out a laugh, bitter and brittle, that cut through the storm like a knife. "Somewhere to go? No, sir, I got nowhere at all. They sent me back, you see. Said I wasn't what they ordered." She swiped at her face with a trembling hand, smearing more mud across her cheek. "Said I was too ugly to be a bride." Jed's brow furrowed, his mind struggling to make sense of her words. "Who's they?" he asked, stepping closer, though he kept his distance to avoid crowding her. "The man who paid for me," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, as if the words were too heavy to speak loudly. "Mr. Hargrove, from Cheyenne. I was a mail-order bride, sent from Boston. Traveled all this way, thinking I'd have a home, a husband, maybe a chance at something good." But when he saw me at the station, a broken bar. She paused, her breath hitching. "He took one look and said I wouldn't do. Said he wanted a beauty, not a broken bar, not this." She gestured as herself, her hand sweeping over her soaked dress and tangled hair, her shoulders curling inward as if she could make herself smaller, less visible. Jed studied her, trying to see past the rain and the shadows. Her dress, once fine by the looks of it, was now a sodden mess of gray fabric, clinging to her slight frame. Her hair, brown and matted, stuck to her face, and her bonnet was more rag than hat. But her eyes green as the prairie after a spring rain held a fire that hadn't been doused by the storm or the cruelty she'd faced. They were wide and wary, but there was a spark in them, a defiance that spoke of a woman who'd been knocked down but wasn't broken. Ugly? Jed didn't see it. She looked worn, sure, battered by the journey and the rejection, but there was a strength in the set of her jaw, a quiet resilience that stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years. "That Hargrove sounds like a damn fool," Jed said, his voice blunt but not unkind. "A man who judges a woman by one glance in a storm ain't worth the dirt on your shoes." "What's your name, ma'am?" She hesitated, her eyes searching his face for a trap. "Clara," she said finally. "Clara Mayhew." Jed froze, the name hitting him like a kick from a mule. "You're my Clara Mayhew?" The words slipped out before he could stop them, raw and unguarded. Her eyes widened, and he cursed himself silently for sounding like a fool. "I mean a broken bar. I wrote to the agency. They said you were coming to Willow Creek." "For me?" Clara's lips parted, but no words came at first. She stared at him, her expression a tangle of hope, suspicion, and something like fear. "You're Jed Carson?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, tipping his hat despite the rain, a habit he couldn't shake even in a downpour. "That's me. I figured you'd change your mind when you didn't show. Thought maybe you took one look at the idea of a rancher's life and hightailed it back east." "They sent me to Hargrove by mistake," she said, her words tumbling out now, as if a dam had broken. "The agency mixed up the letters. He was waiting for a bride too, some other woman they'd promised him. When he saw me, he said I wasn't her, wasn't what he paid for. Said my face'd scare off his cattle." She tried to laugh, but it came out as a sob. "He sent me back on the stagecoach, told the driver to take me to Willow Creek. Said maybe you'd take pity on me, since you were expecting me anyway." Jed's jaw tightened, a slow burn of anger kindling in his chest. He didn't know this Hargrove, but he wanted to ride to Cheyenne and teach the man a lesson in manners. Pity? That wasn't what he felt, looking at Clara now. Her words painted a picture of a woman who'd crossed half a country for a chance at a new life, only to be spat on and sent away like a faulty parcel. Yet here she was, still standing, still fighting through her tears. He crouched down, bringing his eyes level with hers, ignoring the mud that soaked into his knees. "Clara, I ain't one for pretty words, but I don't reckon you're ugly. Not by a long shot. And I ain't Hargrove. I don't want some fancy beauty who can't handle a hard day's work or a lonely night. If you're willin', I'd like to take you home. My home. See if we can't make sense of this together." She blinked, rain dripping from her lashes, her green eyes searching his face for a light. She didn't find one, but the wariness didn't leave her. "You don't even know me," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I could be a liar, a thief, or worse. Why would you take a chance on me?" Jed straightened, wiping a hand across his jaw, where a day's stubble rasped against his palm. "I know you're strong enough to sit here in a storm and still have fight in you," he said. "I know you crossed a country for a man you never met, and you're still here, even after he threw you away. That's enough for a start. I ain't promising a fairy tale, Clara. My life's hard, and my ranch ain't much to look at, but it's honest, and so am I." Clara studied him, her gaze piercing through the rain. The storm hadn't let up, but the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them, standing in the mud in the dark, weighing each other's worth. Finally, she gave a small nod, barely perceptible. "All right, Mr. Carson," she said, "I'll come with you. But I ain't promising nothing either. I've had enough of promises that don't hold." "Fair enough," Jed said, a faint smile tugging at his lips of the first he'd felt in days. He reached for her valise, tying it to Rusty's saddle, then offered his hand. Her fingers were cold and trembling as they closed around his, but her grip was firm. He helped her onto the horse, settling her in front of him so she'd be shielded from the worst of the wind. As they rode out of Willow Creek, the rain kept falling, washing away the dust of the day. The road to the ranch stretched ahead, dark and uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Jed didn't feel alone. Two strangers, bound by a mistake and a chance, headed into the storm together, not knowing if they'd find a home or just another heartbreak.